So I wanted to talk today about sitting on the floor. Perhaps you are starting a new movement practice and you're being asked to sit on the floor to begin, and you find yourself in a position like this, where it's really not relaxing at all, and your knees are way up high off the ground, and you're feeling like you either have to lean on your hands behind you to be relaxed, to be able to listen and pay attention, or you're holding on for dear life here. There's a lot of tension in your arms and you can't breathe very well. Your head is kind of bowed forward and there's just a lot of stiffness in your hips. So this is common because a lot of people sit in chairs effectively this way. We sit on our pelvis with it tucked under and we lean our back into the support of the backrest, and we get stuck in this position, quite simply. So to be able to sit upright when you are sitting on the floor is quite a challenge, because the floor is asking our legs to be at the same height as our pelvis. It's pushing up into our legs. Our legs can't hang off the edge of the chair. So there's a lot of rotation that's needed in the hip joints, in the thigh bones and the hip joints, and a lot of stretching underneath the legs that doesn't need to happen if we're sitting in a chair. So the key point I want to make as you begin your practice of trying to be more comfortable sitting on the floor is no pain, no gain will not apply here. You actually need to get comfortable by raising the floor to meet your level of mobility as soon as possible, because only then will your tissues begin to relax and your joints be able to articulate in a way that will allow the change of relationships between your different parts, so that sitting on the floor does become a possibility. So it's not a matter necessarily of stretching, it's a matter of adapting the shape you're in by changing the height of the floor underneath certain parts of you that will allow you to recover the agility that everyone has to a certain extent and put you on a path towards being able to sit like this easily. So I want to point out one thing on my body, and I have a pretty easy time getting my trunk to be upright here, but notice how if I sit flat on the ground, my legs, you can see it a little more here in my back leg, are tilted upwards. My knees are higher than my hips, what I'm sitting on. So after a few moments, after just a couple of minutes, I would begin to tire here. Even though I look like I'm able to sit upright, if I wanted to do 20 minutes of sitting meditation here, I would definitely elevate onto something higher than the floor, because I can already feel that my back is having to work to keep itself upright. And if you are well organized, you shouldn't feel that anything is having to work terribly much. So what you want to do is bring a folded blanket under your hips, under your pelvis. And we're going to work with cross-legged sitting, which is familiar to most people. So notice just now on me that little 2 to 4 inch lift that I just gave myself has changed the angle of my thigh bone to be a little bit more parallel to the floor and perpendicular to my trunk. And I can feel that just that bit of lift under my hips. And notice I'm not back here. I'm not sitting with the blanket all the way under my legs. I'm kind of right at the edge, just like I would be if I were trying to sit like this in a chair. So almost as if I'm going to try and slip off the edge of it. So there's a way that lifting the pelvis allows the pelvis itself to tilt out of the tuck. So if we're used to sitting with a tucked pelvis, we're lifting the floor in order to give ourselves the room in our hip joints there to roll the pelvis over the ball and socket joint that encases the head of your thigh bone. So if your legs were high up like this, as they are when you sit, there's no room for you to make that adjustment, right? Your hips can only go so far before they run into your thigh bone. So by letting the legs be a little lower, you can get that extra bit of articulation. Now, you may through this much lift, still be a little bit here. Maybe your back is really used to being hunched over and it's quite stiffly tucked here or flattened out in the lower back. So what you need to do is keep lifting the floor. So a lot of studios have blocks now, and you can find these online very easily. So I like to put a firm block under my bottom so that I feel what feels like floor, but I'm putting it on top of a soft, slightly unstable base, which means that I'm going to have to wake up and balance while I'm sitting, which is a nice little thing to use. Introducing instability can help us change relationships and make adaptations that we wouldn't make if we were feeling super stable. So notice now that I'm a little bit higher, my legs are sloping downward from my hips. They're past parallel, they're going downward. And I've got a lot of movability here in my pelvis. I can tilt it forward and back really easily. And I feel my breath and my voice and my trunk are all much more relaxed than they were even just on the blanket. And what's interesting about being up this high is that I have relatively little contact between my legs and the floor here. So only really the outer edges of my feet are what I'm using to support myself. But that's nice because it gives you a little bit of sense of play and that you're having to use your whole body to be in this position. So it's not a position that we would go to sleep in, right? That we just check out in. We actually are redefining sitting for ourselves as something quite dynamic. So one last note is that people often think that they should lift their chests in order to sit upright. And that is just completely extra work that you really don't have to do. That's an extra contraction in the back that really doesn't contribute to good posture or efficient movement at all. So you want the front of your chest to just relax. And you want to feel that you can really get your pelvis out of the tuck. So that will take some trial and error, some adjustment. You may find that when you roll your hips forward, the chest automatically lifts, and that's because you're used to having your body in a relationship like that. And so you're changing the relationship. You want to drop the front, and you want to slightly untuck the back, which might feel like lifting. So those are some tips, and what you want to do is ensure that you're trying this far more frequently than just when you go to your movement class. So yes, go to your movement class, get there a little early so you have time to set this up and really be in a good sitting posture before the class even begins. But also create this at home, create this at work, and sit multiple times a day, even if it's not for a long period of time. Just get used to creating these new relationships. And you'll find that the agility and the mobility in the joints really starts to come quite quickly.